Hello and welcome back. In this episode we are going to continue our series where we are taking a look at the many new features which are available in C# 4.0. The focus of this episode is going to be taking a look at named and optional parameters. So what is an optional parameter? Well, if you've ever worked with BB, whether .NET or 6 or one of its predecessors, or ever just simply tinker with the language, you kind of already have an understanding of what an optional parameter is. Basically, an optional parameter allows you to provide a default value within the signature of the method so that you don't necessarily have to provide a value to it at runtime. Now that we understand that, what is a named parameter? Well, besides basic syntax candy, named parameters allow you to explicitly call out the parameter that a pushed-in value is meant to push into. It's one of the many different features that we're going to take a look at in C# 4. So let's go ahead and get started. I've got a pretty straightforward console application here. And within this console application, I have a single class that has a method in it that's been overloaded 2 times. And this is pretty common in the .NET world or in any programming language that implements method override. And what's probably happened here is, the original intent, the user only needed to pass in a string, and somewhere along the line, they're like, oh man, now I need to pass in a boolean, so they created an overload of it instead of creating a new method. And then finally came in and said, okay, not only do I need that boolean, but I also need some string. But in our scenario here, we didn't pass in the string at the end of the parameter list. We tacked it in to the middle of the parameter list. Pretty common scenario, and something you can work with. Probably what's going to happen in these scenarios is the developer is going to do this dot, I'll pass in param a, and then I'll do empty string and false. And they'll come down here and they'll do the same thing, and they'll pass in the values as they have them. And you basically leave all the logic for the last method. And this seems to work okay, and there's some pros and some cons to that. But one of the big cons to this is if I bounce back to my caller of this, and I hover, start to do Intellisense, and I see this is important, I see that there's 3 overloads for this. Now, unless I have great up-to-date comments, as a developer, I don't know which of these 3 I need. And if I want only to pass in the string, what's the default value of the boolean, or what's the default value of the string? So it kind of can become a little kludgy and a little painful at sometimes. Well, fortunately, they've kind of resolved this issue to a bit in .NET 4.0, and they've done so by creating optional parameters. So how do we go about creating optional parameters and using them? I'm going to rename this class here. It's basically the same class as before. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to delete the first 2 methods. And I'm going to do this because I don't need them. Because what we're going to do is we're going to make this an optional parameter and this an optional parameter. And I can say that this is required, and I know this because I don't default to a value. And I'm going to say that this is optional because if you don't provide it, it'll be empty string, and this is optional because it has a false. Now, one key thing to understand here is you can't have an optional parameter in the beginning and then remove the option later on down the parameter list. Optional parameters have to be last in the chain of parameters. So now that we've seen how to create an optional parameter in terms of the syntax, how would it look via Intellisense? If I look at it via Intellisense, I see I have only one method because, again, I only do have one method. But you'll see that string A has no default value, but you'll see in my signature that string B is an empty string, and string C, boolean, param C, equals to false. That removes all guesswork from the end user's or end developer's perspective, because now they don't need to kind of guess which variant of the method to call. And if they don't call the variant with all the values, what's the default value going to be? And is somebody going to come out from behind them or underneath them in the future and change what the default is meant to be? Because what could happen in the future is that boolean could change from true to false, and without the Intellisense there, I don't know if it's going to help, know that, and I'm not going to be left alone or left assured that it's not going to change. So that's what what an optional parameters are. And there's something that it's kind of stirred a bit of a debate, but they can be both a good and a bad thing. Now, when you have optional parameters, they can be used in conjunction with named parameters. And what is a named parameter? Well, if we bounce back to my method here that has my optional parameters, you'll see that string A has something. So let's go ahead and put hello world. And then, I don't care about B, so why should I have to do this? What I could do instead is type param C, and if I start typing, you'll see Intellisense comes up, and I can hit enter, and you'll see it says param C. And param C is the name of the parameter in the method. I provide the colon, and I can put true. That is a named parameter. I've explicitly named the parameter that the value is going to be attached to. What's pretty cool with this is, especially with optionals, is I don't have to provide all the values within the parameter list. Now in this scenario, to make it readable, what I will suggest that we do is we enumerate each of the parameters that we're using if we don't use all of them. Let's just write some clean code, make the next guy not have to guess what values you're using. You'll notice that ReSharper wants to comment this out or remove it because it thinks it's redundant. Personally, I think this is a bad rule within ReSharper. I think if you're going to use name parameters for a method, use them everywhere. That way no one has some guesswork. Let's go ahead and put a breakpoint here. Let's see how all this new magic works. If I F11 over this, hit F10 here. If I hover over param A, you see hello world. Param B is empty string, and param C is true. Now one cool little IDE thing I want to point out. You see as I'm hovering over this parameter, I come over here and I get this standard IntelliSense. We've seen this before, but there's just something new here. It's a little pin. That pin allows me to keep a watch on that parameter at runtime. Now, if I let this run, it's going to stop. Let's run this again, because I want to show you this is a little cool trick. You'll see the param true or param C with true stays up there, so it keeps a watch all the time. Now this is really cool. If I expand that, I can add in some comments. Pretty cool little IDE feature they've added in here. Has nothing to do with name parameter, optional parameters, but I'd point that out as we're in here. At some of the new stuff that's in the .NET IDE, the .NET framework. So let's go ahead and kill this real quick. So let's recap. What we looked at first was how we could create optional parameters within C# 4.0 and how utilizing optional parameters can allow us to remove an entire list of overloads, and remove that down to just one single method while I can provide values if you do not at runtime. I also talked about how if you are going to use optional parameters, that you cannot put an optional parameter first in the string and then remove the option later on in the parameter list. The optional parameters have to come at the very end. And then finally we took a look at how you can use named parameters, and especially in conjunction with optional parameters, and how you can use a named parameter by using the parameter name, colon, and then the value. So I hope you learned something. Until next time.